In my previous video, I connected the dots on several truly remarkable similarities between Plato's description of the lost city of Atlantis to that of the mysterious Richat Structure, also known as the Eye of the Sahara, which is located in a remote region of the Western Sahara Desert in Mauritania. And in this video, which is essentially part 2, I'm going to share many other specific details that Plato had shared about Atlantis, its empire, that you will not only find fascinating, but will also further support that the Richat Structure is indeed the most likely location for the lost city of Atlantis. Because let's not forget the remarkable similarities which I outlined in my previous video, including that Atlantis was said to be made of concentric circles, specifically 3 rings of water and 2 of land, which matches the Richat's design if it had water in it. But even more significant than that, it precisely matches the diameter of what would be the outer wall when converting to modern measurements. This is an unbelievably significant detail. And when you combine other similarities, including that the Richat Structure has mountains to the north, with rivers on those mountains, just as Plato described, and that Atlantis was said to open to the sea at the south, which also matches the topography of the Richat Structure, that is if it had at one point met the coast of the ocean, which yes, there is definitive evidence that it did, as I'll be sharing in just a moment. But furthermore, the entire area surrounding the Richat Structure is a massive level plain, with even a portion of it having a rectangular resemblance, similar to what Plato had described. Now, these are not the only similarities that match Plato's and Solon's description of the lost city of Atlantis, and I shared those other details in my prior video. However, there are a few counter-arguments that would suggest that the Eye of the Sahara cannot be the true location of Atlantis. For example, many people still believe that Atlantis was just a myth, that Plato made it up and it never actually existed, but let's not forget that that's what people said about the lost city of Troy. Even the so-called experts said that it was made-up poetry. But that was until it was discovered in Turkey in the 1800s, proven to be true all along. And they said the same exact thing about the lost city of Angkor. They said that it's just a myth and never really existed. But again, that was until they found it in the dense jungle of Cambodia, hidden for centuries until it was rediscovered in the mid-1800s. Now, the most common response I received in my prior video regarding the Richat Structure being a possible location of Atlantis were comments that said something to the effect of, the Richat is a natural formation, so no, it cannot be Atlantis. But why would the Richat Structure being a natural formation exclude it from being Atlantis? If anything, being a natural formation would further support the possibility that it is Atlantis, especially when you consider the description of its massive size. Do the math on the circumferences of what would be the 3 circles of water. Just how many miles or kilometers of digging/dredging would be required to do this? The amount of earth that they would have to move is mind-boggling and unrealistic, especially without having heavy earth-moving machinery and equipment to do so. I mean, are we to think that the entire massive design of Atlantis would have been a man-made construction? It would make far more sense for Atlantis to have been built upon a natural formation, just as civilizations have been doing for thousands of years throughout the world, and as we are still doing today in many different places. But the most significant argument against the Richat Structure being a possible location of Atlantis involves it being hundreds of miles from the ocean and having an elevation of closer to 1,300 feet above sea level. How could the Richat be the location of the capital of Atlantis when it was said to have been an island? Many people have stated that it is simply not possible and that there is no evidence to support that the Richat had met the ocean. However, we must consider one key piece of evidence, which is that all water wells within and in the area around the Richat Structure contain exclusively salt water, all the way down to 200 meters below the surface. In fact, only wells that have been drilled to depths exceeding that 200 meters in this region contain fresh water. And this is despite, again, being 500 kilometers inland from the coast and being nearly 1,300 feet above sea level. How did that salt water get there? But perhaps just as significant, the center island is the one place throughout the Richat that produces fresh spring water at surface level, just as Plato described. The significance of these details cannot be overstated. To take this a step further, we must consider the scientific explanation for how the Richat Structure was formed, which was that it is a result of magma chambers uplifting molten rock towards the surface. In other words, this area once had a lower elevation than it does now, so is it possible that this area was at sea level some 12,000 years ago? Because according to Plato, Atlantis disappeared 11,600 years ago, which, like I mentioned in my prior video, just so happens to coincide perfectly with the Younger Dryas climate catastrophe, which abruptly ended approximately 11,600 years ago, and was followed by what is referred to as Meltwater Pulse 1b, a sudden and rapid increase in global sea levels. This similarity of 11,600 years ago is another amazing coincidence that furthers my thoughts that the destruction of Atlantis is related to the Younger Dryas event. But some will say that the Richat could not have increased to its current elevation of nearly 1,300 feet in just 12,000 years. So we must evaluate empirical scientific data to understand what could be geologically possible over the course of some 12,000 years. Let's consider the example of Antarctica that I used in my prior video and the fact that the continent is rising at a rate of 1.6 inches per year as a result of subsurface activity. 1.6 inches a year. Well, do the math on the Richat's elevation, and you will see that even if it was uplifted at a slower rate than Antarctica, it is well within the possibility over this length of time. And here you can see just a few different examples of several outstanding comments I received from viewers who pointed this out and shared their own calculations. Now, using those calculations, take a look at what the area would look like when you account for the difference in elevation and sea level. These images you are seeing are from floodmap.net. Go there and play with the numbers and tell me that this isn't incredibly interesting. And it certainly shows us how this area could have been an island with a large plain, just as Plato described. And it could also provide an explanation as to its location from the Strait of Gibraltar, as no trace of Atlantis has ever been found in the Atlantic Ocean, despite countless searches over the last several decades. Plato also stated that the whole island of Atlantis was said to be towering and steep towards the side of the sea. Could this be possible at the Richat? Because look at the Adra Highlands located near the Richat. This long rim is 1,500 feet higher than the basin below. And when you view it with the use of flood maps, it's an additional similarity that may match Plato's description. Now, some will look at these flood maps and say, well, yeah, you're just playing with numbers here to make the scenario work, but we're really not, because the known scientific evidence is that the Richat structure was uplifted by subsurface magma chambers, thus increasing the surrounding elevation. And we have empirical scientific data that proves that even if the Richat was uplifted at a much slower rate of what we already know is possible, such as with the example of Antarctica, it is well within the possibility. And not to mention, there is additional evidence of widespread subsurface volcanic activity in the region, as we can see in the examples of the nearby Canary and Cape Verde Islands, which are just off the coast of West Africa. So clearly, the subsurface activity is widespread and has been ongoing for a considerable length of time. And the very fact that scientists have so many unanswered questions about the nature of the Richat structure, it would be foolish to rule out the various possibilities of what could have happened there over the past 12,000 years. Scientists specifically state that the structure went through multiple stages of being pushed up and down to create the incredibly unique design that we see today. Pair that with what Plato stated about Atlantis having sank into the ocean. Perhaps the Richat was later pushed back up out of the ocean. Now, another detail that is worth repeating is that Plato specifically stated that there were an abundance of elephants on the island. Well, elephants exist in Mauritania today, and there's even ancient wall art depicting them in caves near the Richat structure along with skeletal remains. This detail is small, yet significant, as some of the other suggested locations for Atlantis are in regions of which elephants are not known to ever have existed. Now, these details I just shared are certainly compelling, but where are the artifacts? Where's the evidence that a civilization was ever even there? Well, there actually are a ton of artifacts that have been found in and around the Richat structure, and archaeologists do not know what civilization they are from. And this was shared in the documentary Visiting Atlantis, which I mentioned in my prior video, as being one of my sources of information, and I highly recommend that you visit their website, visitingatlantis.com, and follow the link to watch their video. I imagine that this will help the creators of that documentary, but in their video, they show footage of many different artifacts that have been found in and around the Richat, including gold jewelry, arrowheads, even stone weights that resemble ones that are commonly used with fishing nets. They even found hundreds of stone spheres cut with unbelievable precision. All of these artifacts were found in and around the Richat at surface level, which again is in the middle of nowhere, proving that at some point in the distant past people did live there. The artifacts may not necessarily be as old as Atlantis, but then again, we do not know who they belong to or from when. But what about remnants of stone structures and buildings? Why haven't they found any of that? Well, unfortunately, nobody has actually gone looking. No heavy equipment has ever been brought to the Richat for excavation, nor has there ever been an archaeological dig, and for all we know, tons of evidence is buried just meters below the surface, which, let's not forget, is a massive area spanning nearly 15 miles across. However, it seems to me that when you consider the surrounding area, it is apparent that it was blasted by a force of flowing water. The Richat itself has been acknowledged to be heavily eroded, which we can all see for ourselves. In my prior video, I suggested that perhaps a tsunami blasted this area going from west to east from the Atlantic Ocean. However, I now think that it is just as likely that this area was blasted by flowing water going from east to west from the Sahara, possibly originating from the Mediterranean Sea, as the topography upon a closer look could possibly support this. Or perhaps more likely, the force of water could have come from ancient lakes that are now known to have existed in the Sahara. For example, the scientific evidence is that the Sahara Desert was once lush green and contained a network of rivers and massive lakes, one of which would be one of the largest in the world today if it still existed, as it covered more than 42,000 square miles, or nearly 109,000 square kilometers of surface area. Even look at this fascinating article from just a couple years ago where they discussed the existence of a massive 500-kilometer river that ran through North Africa, specifically through the country of Mauritania. Something that many people are not aware of is just how recently the climate of the Sahara changed, with some of the most recent evidence indicating that it suddenly went from lush green and covered with lakes and rivers to a barren desert, get this, just 5,000 years ago, with scientists calling it one of the Earth's most dramatic climate shifts. So perhaps the Richat was blasted by what some have referred to as the draining of the Sahara. But getting back to the question of where are the remains of stone buildings and structures, well, to answer that question, we have to understand from which direction the flowing water came from and how strong it was. What we need are experts to evaluate the geography of the area and determine the likely places that we would find debris that would be carried or pushed during such a cataclysmic flood event. We should also consider the possibility that this area was blasted from both west to east and from east to west during two different events. And we must understand that most of any remaining structural debris could possibly be hundreds of kilometers away from the Richat. We just don't know how strong the force was that came through here. But considering the evidence is so apparent even when viewed from outer space, and after so many thousands of years, I would suggest that it was stronger than anything we ever thought possible. And it seems to me that not only would the city have been completely obliterated and carried or pushed away, but the layers of ground underneath the city would have been taken with it, along with the buildings, the walls, the roads, and everything else included. I mean, just think about how small, localized floods completely remove modern roads and the earth that lies underneath them. Perhaps a massive flood could explain the significant erosion of the Richat, and considering that whatever the event was that destroyed Atlantis, it was said to happen in just one day and night. It was not a slow or gradual event, it was essentially apocalyptic. We must wrap our minds around just how long of a period of time 12,000 years is. How many changes of seasons, weather, climate, countless days of storms, rain, and wind erosion to add with it. The Richat we see today is certainly different than what it looked like some 12,000 years ago. And it's truly amazing that this site has been completely ignored, and it's even more fascinating that so many people have never even heard of it. I even had comments on my prior video from people from South Africa saying that they had never even heard of this place before. But unfortunately, it does not seem likely that an excavation of this site will happen anytime soon. Take a look at the US Department of State's travel advisory for Mauritania. Press pause to read the specifics, but yeah, that is very unfortunate to say the least. Definitely leave a comment and share what your thoughts are so far on all of this, but now we'll jump into the specifics of the City of Atlantis and its empire. Like I've stated, the City of Atlantis, or the capital, was said to be made up of concentric circles, 3 rings of water and 2 of land. Let's start by discussing the center island, which was said to house the king and royal family, along with their servants and most loyal bodyguards. It was sparsely populated in relation to its actual size, and by the way, these images are artist renditions that people have made, which, although they are very well done, keep in mind they do not reflect the scale in comparison to the size of the actual rings of water and land. And these images also do not account for the elevated nature of the land rings, including the center island, which was essentially a hill. But that said, the center island was the location of the main temple of Poseidon, and one can only imagine what that looked like. The center island also had the fabled Garden of Poseidon, which included exotic trees and fruit, and it had fountains and pools. This area was reserved for the royal elite and high priests only. The citizens of Atlantis did not have access to this island, which was also said to be protected by mighty walls and, of course, the ring of water surrounding it. Now, the second land ring housed the military, which was massive and said to consist of a powerful navy. And the second ring of water was the military harbor that was said to dock at least, get this, 1,200 warships. By the way, could those stone spheres I mentioned earlier have been cannonballs? But 1,200 warships, incredible. And it is estimated that within the second land ring, it housed upwards of 240,000 sailors. This second ring of water also housed the naval stalls and supplies. It had underground docks, soldier training facilities, towers, and guardhouses. This land ring was essentially the military center of the island. It also had a large road that was some 200 meters wide that ran through the middle of the island encircling the entire ring. This road was also used for horse races. Think about the massive races that would circuit the island. It must have been a sight to see and attracted many people from afar, which it must also be mentioned that many different languages were said to be spoken at Atlantis, further indicating widespread trade and visitation. It seems to me that this place was an absolute fortress. It was protected as an island in the first place and then contained additional islands protected by rings of water within it. How could an invading force ever overtake this place? And if there was ever an uprising of the people, how would they even be able to get to and sack the innermost island where the leaders were, having been protected by water and large walls, and not to mention the entire military in between? You would literally need an air force or advanced artillery or something. Now, the first land ring within the island was the religious sector of the city, and was said to be home to a large priesthood. It also had towers and gates, and even had hanging gardens as well. Its water ring was a harbor for merchant ships, and it also functioned as a public transport system. Small boats would ferry people from one side of the island to the other, and don't forget how large Atlantis was said to be, so this transport system would definitely be beyond useful. On the other side of the wall would be what we would describe as downtown Atlantis. Here is a quote from Plato. "The area between the outer wall and the merchant harbor was densely crowded and busy all day and all night." It has been estimated that the city of Atlantis may have been home to over 1 million people, which is not hard to believe based on its size, and keep in mind that this is half the size of New York City, and we're not talking about Manhattan, we're talking about the entire city. So considering that Atlantis was said to be busy all day and all night, and said to be rich in architecture, bustling with trade, and protected by a great army, and the fact that it connected to the ocean, well, this place was happening. But it is easy to understand how the description of Atlantis may have sounded crazy to people 2,500 years ago when Plato first shared the story. And this brings me back to a quote from Plato, which is, "This tale about Atlantis, though strange, is certainly true, having been attested by Solon, who was the wisest of the 7 sages." And here we are thousands of years later with all of our modern developments. We can certainly wrap our minds around a city that would have been busy all day and all night, bustling with trade and impressive architecture. But that aside, Atlantis wasn't just a city. It was an empire consisting of 10 kingdoms which were said to be ruled by the 10 children of Poseidon, who were born as 5 sets of twins. It was said to be a vast empire stretching as far away as Italy, and even Egypt was a colony of Atlantis. You'll recall me mentioning in my prior video that the entire legend of Atlantis actually originates from the ancient Egyptians. The fact that Egypt was said to be a colony of Atlantis could further support that the Richat is the location when you consider that they are both on the same continent, at least when compared to other suggested locations of Atlantis which are much further away. And by the way, something interesting and fun to share since so many people left comments about it in the prior video, but isn't it amazing at just how much the Richat looks like an eye? Many people made the comparison to the notable Eye of Horus seen throughout ancient Egypt. And I'm not suggesting that there's a connection here, but it certainly is a unique similarity, and the Richat even has a bluish appearance to it when viewed from space. But that aside, the fact that an incredible civilization such as Atlantis was said to span such a vast distance and consist of 10 kingdoms, we really need to reevaluate the age of various megalithic structures found across the region, which we still cannot explain today, including the pyramids of Giza as just one example. We really need to get into the mindset that so many of the unanswered questions and mysteries we have about our ancient past is related to the fact that we were far older than we ever realized, and that civilization, whatever it was or whoever they were wiped out a very long time ago. And all of this has been building upon the videos I've been making since the beginning of this channel, which is that what we were taught in school about our true ancient past is far from it, and that we were far older and advanced than we ever thought. So the question becomes, how old were we, and how advanced did we become? But the issue goes beyond what they're teaching or not teaching in school, because you would only really become aware of this information if you go looking for it. You won't find it reported in the media, and the structure that runs most of the scientific and academic community shuns this information. If you followed my channel for a while, you've heard me make many statements about the so-called mainstream. And the topic of human civilization dating back further than 6,000 years ago with the Sumerians is something that they just do not want to talk about. And I've, of course, made this example how they've ignored the most recent scientific data, and one great example is the Great Sphinx's water erosion around its enclosure. And in my prior video, though, I gave the example of the omissions in both the Atlantis and Richat Structure Wikipedia pages. Well, I encourage you to go there and visit the View History tab on the Richat Structure page and look at everything that's taken place since I uploaded my prior video on September 4th. Dozens of edits and dozens of deletions by moderators. It was eventually locked, and although things do need to be cited properly, you will still not find one single word that connects either of these two topics together. And whether you like Wikipedia or not, we have to acknowledge that Wiki is what shows up at the top of Google searches, and is thus a primary source of information to the masses. And regardless of whether the Eye of the Sahara is the true location of Atlantis or not, it is certainly premature and honestly a bit foolish for anyone to rule it out and declare that it could not have been the location of Atlantis. Because make no mistake, this site matches far more aspects about the description of Atlantis than any other proposed site from around the world, including the most specific and precise details. This site, the Richat Structure, needs to be studied and excavated, not disregarded and omitted. And for some reason, almost nobody has ever even heard of it. Weird, right? Well, I'll close it up there, but I look forward to reading the comments and seeing what people's thoughts are on all of this, but hit the like button, subscribe. I'm Jimmy, this is Bright Insight, and I have many more videos to come on a whole wide variety of topics. Take care, everybody.